Good morning, everybody, and a big warm welcome along to this inclusive education webinar. We are Down Syndrome International and Down Syndrome Association UK, and we've put together this webinar today with a view to discussing and thinking about what inclusion means, what inclusive education means, how it can be defined, and how it can be best implemented across classrooms, across the UK and internationally. Our hope is everything discussed today will be universal, with children at the centre of all discussions. Now, a few things to think about before we get started. We have Q&A function enabled, so your questions, we will attempt to answer as many as we can. Any that we don't get through today, we will attempt to answer afterwards, okay? And we will try our best to send them through to you. We also, as you can see, and it's great to see lots of people on the chat function, we have enabled that. So please engage with us during this discussion. And please put your name, where you're from, and any reactions to any of the answers that we've got this morning, okay? Now, this webinar, Inclusive Education, we are defining very briefly. We will go into this very briefly as all children, effectively included alongside all children. I wish inclusive education could just be called good education. And this morning we'll be going into detail about what it means for all different stakeholders within the education hierarchy. We'll be thinking about the learners themselves, learners with special educational needs, disabilities, of course, peers and friends and friendship groups alongside them in schools. We'll be talking about teachers, teaching assistants, school leaders, student teachers and their lecturers, and systems of education too. So it's great to see you. Thank you very much. It's a real privilege and pleasure to be talking about this. I know you're all going to be on board with the things we're talking about. Those of you that aren't sure, please add your questions, please add your comments. We'd love to see them, and we'd love to try and answer them too. Now, we have some panelists. The panelists are just going to come in right about now. I'm really pleased to welcome our different panelists today. Now, through my research at Down Syndrome International with education, these people have really stood out and have been fantastic advocates for inclusion and education as a whole. So I'm going to go through our panelists this morning for you, let them introduce themselves. First of all, we've got Dominic. Dominic, hey Dom.
Hello, good morning everyone. It's great to be here. I'm greeting you from sunny Manchester. Sunny for once. So my background is actually originally a mainstream primary school teacher who got really interested in the sort of various challenges of the diversity of kids I had in front of me. I got particularly interested in particular problems around what we now call, well, dyslexia syndrome, dyslexia spectrum, partly because one of my sisters had really struggled with literacy at school. I then moved actually into a special school to teach there as a class teacher. I learned an awful lot more, and then became really interested in working with slightly older kids, so worked in secondary, and then from there into a local authority support team, from there to local authority advisory work, and then finally into working with teachers in training at one of the universities in Manchester.
Great, thank you. And hi Janet, we've got Janet too, Janet Lord.
Hi Chris, thanks for that. Hi everybody, lovely to be here with you all. So as Chris said, I'm Janet Lord. I look after the education in the Faculty of Health and Education at Manchester Met University, also in Manchester, so a little bit down the road from where Dom is at the moment. We have about 9,000 students altogether, nurses, teachers, physios. My background is in teaching. And I also in teacher education. So one of the things that I'm really dear to my heart is inclusion, because I have two daughters, one of whom is disabled. And those of you here who are parents will know what that's like. I am a warrior parent. I've been a warrior parent for many years. So I have empathy for people like that, but also I understand the challenges of what it's like to try and provide a truly inclusive education for everybody. Lovely to be here. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Janet. Next up, we've got Emma. Emma.
Hi everybody, absolute privilege to be here today, so thank you for having me, Chris, and thank you for listening in, everyone. So very much like the two panelists before, I'm an educator. I've been in education for 20 years. I'm a teacher, primary trained, but also a psychologist, so my career started off in the psychology field. So entering into the classroom, I was always interested in children who have barriers to learning. And that's really where my interest of the area of special needs came in. As my career progressed, I moved on to understanding more and more needs, from Down syndromes to dyslexia to all the things that's been mentioned today. But I specialise in autism, and that's really where my specialist lies. I'm also a SEND parent. My son has Down syndrome, so it's a very fitting day to be on this webinar today. And just working in this field shares, one, the cutting edge of education, and the fact that this area of education, if we can get this right, we can really get education right, because it's education for everybody. And so I really, really want to just push this area as much as possible with conversations like this, because it is the cutting edge of understanding the education process. And just understanding that, you know, difference is the norm. And if we can just get a system that really embraces that, we will really have a system that's going to make a difference for all children's lives. So I'm really glad to be here to share this conversation today.
Wonderful, thanks so much. And we've also got Paul Rose.
Morning, everybody. I'm Paul. I'm based in Derby, in the middle of England. I trained as a primary school teacher. I worked with early years and infant age children my whole teaching career. I eventually became a head teacher of a failing school, turned it round and realized that the way that schools work, the way that teachers teach is able to be transformed if we look at the technologies that are out there in the world and harness them for educational purposes. So I eventually quit my job, left the school in a very good place, and set out on a journey of how you build a technology that enables teachers to watch and learn from each other, children to be supported regardless of their age, their interests, or their learning needs, and how you really bring parents into that education process as well. So it's great to be here, and hopefully I'll be able to contribute some interesting thoughts and ideas.
Paul, I'm absolutely sure you will. Now, our next panelist unfortunately couldn't make it, so I'm going to be the fifth panelist today. My background, I'm a primary school teacher of over 12 years. Special educational needs always been a massive passion of mine, hence why I took this role as Inclusive Education Officer at Down Syndrome International. It is World Down Syndrome Day too. So happy World Down Syndrome Day, everybody. I hope you've all got your brightly coloured socks on. Right, let's get started. We're bang on time. We've got a few questions set up ready. And this webinar, we're hoping, is going to be short and sharp and sweet and straight to the point. Each panelist will be given a short time to answer the questions as we go through them, and we'll try and intersperse this with some of your questions at home too. The first question, Dominic's first. For you, what does an inclusive education look or feel like in the school setting? You're muted there, Dom. Dominic, I think you're muted. There he goes.
There we go. Let's try again. Another classic. Yeah, it's a big question, isn't it? I think what's worth touching upon actually is the idea of what we mean by inclusive education. Very briefly, I mean, yes, we're going to be focusing probably on SEND, special education needs and disabilities today, but it's so much more than that, isn't it? It's about the notion about all members of a community, a school community, being made to feel that they belong effectively, and that will go for staff as well as children, as well as parents. And if I was kind of walking into a school, and it's funny how you get a kind of almost a sort of instinctive sense of how the vibe of a school, I think my daughter might call it, but that notion that, for example, small things like, yes, if inclusion includes actually loads and loads of different children from different backgrounds, so things like a visual timetable, just a small example of something that's going to work really well for children on the autistic spectrum, for children with literacy problems, for new arrivals, perhaps refugees for whom English is not necessarily their first language, little things like that. But as I say, that palpable sense about the quality of relationships, the way that children interact with each other and the way children interact with staff, the way that children move around the school, the way that the school is designed, the notion that there are safe places as well as socializing places, those things. Okay.
Cheers. Thank you. Janet?
Thanks. So when I go into schools, Dom's just said this, you kind of get a sense as you go in, I think. But one of the things that I look out for is there a young person or child sitting on their own somewhere? Is there a real sense of belonging? Is there a sense of community? Are we all in this together? Are we truly accepting that, yeah, we're all different and that's good. And there's loads of stuff that we can bring, but because you are different in some way, whether that is that you've had an SEND label put on you or not, is that something that is valued and addressing that sense of belongingness, that sense of community? And for me, it's about equity as opposed to equality. So it's not necessarily about, well, we don't do the same for everybody. We don't, because Dom's different from me, Emma's different from me. So we do what's the right thing for that person because it's truly individualized. Wonderful.
Thank you so much. Emma?
Hard to follow both of them because they are both spot on. I think it is about that sense of belonging. It's understanding that when you walk in, you do get the energy. You know, a school that is about the community that they serve, and they're really just focused on the young people that they see each and every day. And it is that idea of individualized approach. I think that's one of the hardest things to do in the classroom, but when it's done, it can really embrace so much around this inclusivity that we're talking about today. And I would say that one of my son's teachers said in his very first year there that basically he showed her what inclusion could truly be. And she was saying he's out there in the playground, he cares for the children and they equally care for him. You know, he's given her a sense of what inclusion can look like instead of having these special groups or special parts of the school for different children. He's in his mainstream classroom, he's basically really engaging with all the children there. And that gives her a sense of what she feels is a better ideal of inclusivity. We're on the journey, but that's a better ideal of inclusivity. So for me, it's definitely the energy. It's definitely when you hear teachers saying, these children belong to us and they're not leaving us until whenever the age is right. And, you know, you really get that sense when you're talking to a truly inclusive teacher, you know that a child's going to be supported as best as possible in the knowledge that they have at that time. So inclusivity is definitely a good feeling, but also it's a sense of does this child belong everywhere with everyone? So that would be my answer to that.
Absolutely, thank you. And Paul, please.
My reflection would be around the feeling of self-confidence from the young people themselves, but also self-confidence amongst the staff. And having worked with 4 to 7 year olds extensively, it's quite clear to me that even very young children understand when somebody is excluded for whatever reason, for their gender, for their race, for their abilities or disabilities. We can all spot it. Humans are social creatures that can all spot that exclusion. And then deep down, we all know that if that exclusion can happen to somebody else, it can happen to us. And so when you walk into a school or you walk into a classroom where the inclusion is happening, genuine inclusion is happening, I think it gives everybody within that classroom, within that school, within that community, that self-confidence to say it's okay to be me. And therefore I'm able to be here and to be fully engaged. And I think that for me is what you will pick up in an inclusive environment.
Absolutely, thank you. For me in my teaching career, inclusion was a culture of the school. And the school I worked at last wasn't particularly inclusive. We then welcomed a beautiful little girl with Down syndrome who I fell in love with immediately. And we spent the time making sure that she was included in everything, in the normal stuff, in lunchtime, in break times, in the lessons and activities, in the trips and in the homework and in the sanctions. You know, it was all the stuff, all the little stuff. You know, when the kids got a few minutes spare, she was involved with that, not stuck just with a teaching assistant the whole time. You know, it's a culture of the school that everyone can buy into. It's not just the class teacher doing it and all the other teachers and support staff and leaders and other members and dinner ladies not. It's everybody, it's the whole building, it's the whole community, it's the parents joining in, it's the governors, you know, so inclusion happens everywhere in a building. It doesn't just happen when you're differentiating a maths lesson. You know, it's the whole shebang. It's really, truly understanding as a teacher, your kids, the ones in front of you in your class and the ones that you work with across the day, truly getting to know the way they work, things they like, the things they don't like. Great. Let's go on to question 2. Question 2, who benefits from an effective, inclusive education and how? Let's go to Janet.
Thanks, Chris. So, sorry, I'm sitting in one of those rooms where the lights go off every now and again if you don't move enough. So if I look as if I'm sitting in the dark, it's because I am. And if I start waving my hands around, it's to try and get the lights to come on, but it's failing. So sorry about that. So for me, it's about society. First and foremost, it's really in our society at the moment, we're seeing it really clearly at the moment, aren't we? That there's an us and them, there's othering. There's, oh, well, I'm a part of something different. You're different from me. You're other than me. And that's a systemic thing that goes through society. And it's something that we need to fight. But it's really, really difficult to fight because actually all I am is one person in a classroom maybe, or one parent. It feels really, really hard. And one of the reasons it's lovely to be involved with something like this is because actually we're not on our own. We truly are together, and that's great. And what I want to remind you of, and you might not know this quote, but it's one of my very, very favorite quotes, and it's a Nelson Mandela quote. Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. And it's through education that we change society, and society changes education. So we've got a kind of approach where everybody is valued, and that's the only way. If everybody's valued, we can have a truly democratic, community-based society that's about belongingness. And that's what's really important. And so it's really, really important that society learns from education and education learns from society, because that's for everybody's goods.
Wonderful, thank you very much. Emma, how would you answer that?
Love that response, Janet, thank you. I feel that everyone benefits from inclusion. We all do. Representation really matters. You know, women from backgrounds, men, people with disability, it just really matters. And I think that if inclusion isn't done right, we actually find that society continues to hide groups and continues to not actually elevate the strengths of each group. And so if we can get inclusion at the classroom level effectively done, then actually we can start to see inclusion hopefully becoming more effective throughout society. You know, education, as we know, it is a vehicle, but it's also a bit of a pipeline into employment, isn't it? It's a pipeline into the world. So if education itself isn't effective to show how we can include, how we can support, how we can engage environments to support the individual, then actually employment's still going to find that a really difficult task to do as well. So it's actually, as Janet just said, the way that we see inclusivity at any level is going to impact society, and society is going to impact education. And we need to do a lot more to ensure that we're not seeing inclusion as a barrier, as a task, and it's just part of the world that we're in, and so that we can start to see that trickling through the different levels of society so that people can belong, feel purposeful, and have an impact in their personal circle in the world. So that's why it benefits everybody.
Absolutely, totally agree. What about you, Paul?
I would start by just unpicking what is effective inclusive education. For me, there's too much emphasis on academic, that we think of education being qualifications and exams and the academic side of things. But for me, effective inclusive education enables every child to develop socially, to develop emotionally, to develop physically, and also to develop academically. And therefore, with my school leader hat on, I would say, who benefits from an effective inclusive education that develops every child in those areas? I would say actually the learners who are typical, the average learner, the learner that isn't neurodiverse, that doesn't have a physical disability. Because when educators drive deep down into how do you support learning socially, emotionally, academically, physically, how do you support learners that are most vulnerable and to make the progress that they're able to make, actually what then spirals out of that are the benefits for all of the learners. And just to give you a very brief example, we're working with special schools, and we had a chance conversation with the school leader about one young person who was 18 years of age with fairly profound autism, who was trying to travel independently on public transport, on the bus, to get to school that day. And we started talking about the challenges of enabling that social learning to happen. How do you manage societal activities like that? And so we started looking at technology, looking at use of video, and started to create resources that could be used to trigger conversations about situations that can happen when you're trying to travel independently on a bus. And that then opened out into actually, when you look at the power of video to be able to support understanding of every aspect of life, interactions with strangers and managing friendships and supporting mathematical understanding, etc., etc. What we started to create actually has enormous learning benefits for all learners, because if you're going to reach independence, it doesn't matter whether you're 18 and have barriers that make that difficult for you, or whether you are 10 and normally developing, you've still got to overcome those same challenges. And supporting the most vulnerable learners means that you develop ways to support all learners to achieve.
Wonderful, thank you. I think this originally was set up for student teachers, and I'm trying to think how this can benefit them, and I hope this is being beneficial. But when you enter a classroom, it's really key to get to know your learners, really key to get to know them as individuals, what they enjoy, the way that they best learn. Their academic ability is, of course, crucially important to understand, and how they socialize and how they make friendships and how they develop during your time with them. Effective inclusive education is tapping into those things, looking at the group as a whole, of course, but looking at the individuals that you've got in front of you. And I think when we think about how inclusive education, who it can benefit, it really does, I think, hit the nail on the head. It's the individual. It actually can work for each and every stakeholder within that classroom, each and every child. And I think if you're teaching and you're understanding and really getting to know your children in front of you, not just their academics, but who they are as people, and seeing how they develop and grow and understand what they're like as people, I think that can be, so important to them as they grow up. And just during that brief time that you have them, maybe a year, maybe two, you could be such an amazing role model to them in including them alongside everybody. And I'm not just talking about learners with disabilities. I'm talking about all of them. I'm talking about the children that find everything easy. There'll be kids in your class that find everything you give them easy to begin with. You've got to work really hard to make sure you understand them and you know them to get the best out of them. Looking really closely at your cohort socially, looking how you can help support friendships and how you can, support them if they're on their own or if they're struggling with different things as they grow up, regardless of their age and regardless of their academic ability. Let's go on to Dominic.
All right. So when I received the schedule of the topics for us to discuss, we talked about different, I think you've just mentioned this word, Chris, stakeholder groups. And I think one thing that that to me is going to make the whole thing work or not is the role of staff in schools. And I think, you know, we've alluded to this before, but I'm thinking that particularly the notion that in the children's eyes, that all the staff are part of this project, and that the children and that the staff themselves can benefit as being sort of perceived that way. I mean, I've been in education quite a long time, and I saw the sort of the start of teaching assistants in classrooms, and they were like, "You can't tell me what to do, you're just a TA." I can remember so many incidents where children were kicking off and wouldn't recognise the authority, if you want, of teaching assistants. And teaching assistants have grown within the profession, and I've worked with some really skilled teaching assistants, and a lot of what I learned about autism in the first place was actually I was lucky enough to work with a lady who was really gemmed up on it, and I was faced with a child I really didn't understand, and she really showed me the way. Not only that, just another couple of examples about the staff as a bigger group was when I worked in a special school, we were doing a couple of local projects, and we did 2 history projects, which was my bag. I was like the history person at the school, and did one on the English Civil War, and I was determined to get them in sort of up and moving and doing some role play stuff. So we decided to form a little kind of parliamentarian regiment with the kids, and I didn't know how to make pikes. I can't do woodwork at all, and the caretaker said, "I'll give you a hand." And he furnished them with their pikes, and we did a little display for open day. And I mean, he's standing amongst the children. He's standing within the, you know, within the school, which was sort of somewhat transformed by that. And the second project was we were doing local history, Second World War, and a lady who was working in the kitchens had witnessed the Blitz in this town just outside London. And I said, "Why don't you come and talk to the kids about what it was like to live through the Second World War as a kid?" And, you know, again, her relationship with the kids, their perception of her really changed. So to me, I think it was mentioned right back at the beginning with Paul, self-confidence, the staff feeling confident I have something to contribute. As a teaching assistant, as a caretaker, as a dinner lady, that actually is a stakeholder group that's a key driver of the whole process.
Absolutely, thank you. We have got some questions coming in. We will get onto them after this next one. Question 3, how can education settings and their staff community create a culture of inclusion? Emma.
I think with this one, it's really starting from a point of really wanting to. First of all, the system at the moment makes it very difficult for some leaders to say, we're going to include high numbers of children with additional needs. And because of that, there's a reluctance sometimes to really put in the resources and the time it's going to take to ensure that you've got a truly inclusive environment. So I think you have to start from a point of view of saying, whatever child walks through our doors, whatever child we receive, we're going to do the best by them. And I think that's the starting attitude, because without that, you're going to find it very difficult to move things on. And then it's about all of the things that we've talked about before, really enhancing the sense of belonging, really enhancing the sense of, you know, every child that comes into the school gates belongs to that school and has a place in that school and a right in that school. And the more that attitude and the feel of everyone belongs in this school is developed, the better that it will become. And I think that's where the culture starts. Then in terms of creating, you know, an environment where people, every young person makes progress, and that's socially, emotionally, and academically. I think we have to always keep that in the conversation when we talk about special educational needs, because sometimes the balance can go towards nurture more than it can towards academia. And really what we want to do is strike that middle balance and get as much out for the young person as possible. But I agree that nurture needs to come first. But we need to get that balance. And I think if we can get to a point where the school is very clear about their intention, then we can also get to a point about their action plan towards it. So as a consultant, I do audits, etc. And it's about understanding where the school is in their journey. Do they understand where they are in their SEND journey, or have they just got children in their school? Do they understand where the subject knowledge level is for their staff? Do they understand, you know, the confidence level for their staff? The fact that some of their staff may be pulling back because of their own personal barriers around understanding. Have the leadership and the school challenge their bias enough to say that we're going to push these things through? So when we come into an organisational approach to inclusion, we've got these layers that we have to truly work through. But the starting foundation is any child that walks into these school doors will be our child that we're going to support the best that we can. And if you can start there and then work on everything else, in time to come, your school will become a very inclusive environment. So that would be my starting point.
Outstanding, thank you. Paul, please.
I think for me, it's important to acknowledge the fact that we have limits in terms of what we're able to influence as educators. So if you are a class teacher, you are unlikely to be able to change the inclusive culture or lack of inclusive culture across the school. What you can do is control your classroom environment. So you're able to make sure that inclusion is at the centre of all of your work within your classroom, and hopefully that will influence others who look at how you work. As a school leader, I took on a school that wasn't inclusive, and I found it a very challenging process to shift that culture. It began with me role modelling. So I, every day, did my best to demonstrate in my actions the inclusive processes and the inclusive values that I personally hold. Even where I was the only person in school doing it, I would stand up and I would say, this is the right way to go, therefore I'm going to do it. I think it's then a mixture of finding and supporting champions, those inclusive people who are always in organizations, don't necessarily have a high profile or a powerful voice, but they're always there. Find those people and support them to do more inclusive work. And then allied with that is challenge, where you look at other adults who are not demonstrating the inclusive values that you want to see. You need to challenge it. You need to challenge it directly. And on occasion, that is to challenge it publicly. But I always found the most effective way was to challenge it privately, was to find time to sit down with somebody and to have those challenging conversations about, okay, I'm not seeing that that's inclusion. I think you need to be approaching it like this, etc. And the final thing for me, in terms of changing culture, is an absolute relentlessness, because it's very hard to build a culture of inclusion and it's very easy to end it. So the relentlessness of always stepping up, always making the right choice, always having those challenging, supportive conversations are the key to shifting a culture and making sure that culture perpetuates.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. In schools I've worked at, without fail, I think, some of the best communicators with children haven't necessarily been the teachers and haven't necessarily been the people in leadership. And I think finding those staff members that may well be lunchtime supervisors, may well be, as Dominic was saying, a caretaker, or the support staff, the one-to-one support staff, are fantastic at their job in a lot of cases and are so well equipped, maybe not on paper, but so well equipped to work with children, listen to children, understand them. And they need to be celebrated, and they need to be given the chance to be part of the transformation of a school. Giving them a platform, inviting them to share their expertise across the school. And then the culture can be, a transformation. It is more of it's not an overnight thing. It's something that takes a long time, a lot of effort and resources. But keeping the people on board, keeping people positive within the school about what they're going to do. It's not, oh, there's a learner in that class that's got really terrible behaviour, really difficult to teach, some special educational needs or a disability, and so that's that class. It's the school. How will the school deal with it? How can the senior leader take responsibility and come in and get to know that child, listen to the teacher, give them time, give support staff time to do their jobs and to grow and learn and go on training and do things that are essential to make sure that they're progressing and they're transforming and they're developing as educators. Let's not forget that some of the biggest influences in school are the children. Give them a chance to learn. Rather than being so obsessed about your maths and English lesson, give the children in your class or in your school some time to think about and learn about disabilities, different children, and different different things across the school that do affect them all. And that's such a great way of educating them, is to give them time to understand the individuals. Next person is Dominic, please.
Right. Well, I totally endorse everything I've heard. I just maybe pick up a couple of points. I think it was both Emma and Paul made about this notion about we work with a framework of non-negotiables. And this has to be, it isn't easy, it's very incremental developing inclusive culture, but it has to be based on a really clear understanding. We did 4 case studies quite recently about successful dyslexia friendly schools, and all the head teachers said, look, there's a set of non-negotiables. If you want to work in this school, this is what must happen. We'll support you to make it happen. There's a legal framework that, especially in England, the Special Educational Needs Code of Practice, the Equality Act throughout the UK. We are legally sort of bound to do this. You, as part of this profession, you're bound to do this. Now, you may be feeling nervous. We're going to help. So I just sort of pick up a couple of those points. I mean, but the other point is, I think, and again, it's and I think perhaps Chris alluded to it. There was this notion about voices being heard. And I remember my children at primary school coming back, and my daughter was on the school council, she said, I said, what's it like? She said, oh, I don't know, we just sit around and talk, nothing happens. I read a wonderful paper that was developed in the University of Cantabria in Spain, and they were asking teachers what they actually thought about children's democratic capabilities. And again, I think it was Paul that mentioned that even very, very young children notice where inclusion isn't happening. Children, the paper concluded that actually we can actually trust children with a lot more democratic nous than traditionally we thought of. There was just unformed adults, that are almost kind of unable to make decisions. And I think developing inclusive culture, that a meaningful voice in the forum of developing policy, and a policy, as Emma mentioned, that's audited regularly, and as this process of inclusion unfolds and challenges change, that our audit reflects that who's taking part in that audit. And it's not just the senior leadership team. These voices from around the school, including the children's, need to be part of that.
Wonderful. Thank you very much indeed. Janet, please.
Thanks, Chris. I think what's interesting here is that we need to think about education as something that isn't done to us. I think there's a bit of a culture of this is, you are being educated, that, as teachers, it's just in some way we're doing things. But actually, really good education is about a partnership, co-constructed, collaborative, those sorts of things. And one of the things that research has shown is that inclusive classroom strategies actually work for everybody. So you don't have to have an SEND label on for them to work for you. Even if you haven't got, if you don't have additional needs, then at worst, it makes no difference to you to have particular strategies in a classroom. At best, it actually helps because you can take advantage of all those different ways of dealing with the world, of dealing with what's going on and how you're being taught and so on. So I think it's really important to remember that actually inclusion, it kind of goes back really to our previous question, doesn't it? Inclusion's a good thing for everybody. And then the other things that I would say is that it's about, I guess it's, partly about what Emma said. It has to matter to you. You have to want to do it. And so values are absolutely key. So what are your values? And quite often I go into schools and there might be a mission statement or a vision statement, but what I really want is teachers who say to me, so there's one school that I go into and they say, right, we have no child unknown. That's it. Every single child is known by everybody. It's a big school, and so there is no child who's kind of left on their own. So it's about a kind of open discussion of those values. And then I think also some smaller things like, are the examples you give non-stereotypical examples when you're talking, when you're teaching, or are they things perhaps that are stereotypical? Have you sat down and thought yourself about unconscious bias, your own biases, where you come from, those sorts of things. They can be really hard conversations, even if you're just having them internally. But it's really important that we have them, because we have to have that openness to be able to make sure that we're all on that same page about belongingness and inclusion. So we just need to do it. But I think, you know, really what Paul said, it's blinking hard. So you have to keep on at it. You have to be resilient. You have to challenge things when they come up. And those conversations are really difficult. And that's the only way to get through. Because why are we doing that? We're doing it because it really, really matters for our young people and for the future of our society.
Thank you, Janet, and thank you to all your questions and for all your engagement on the chat. We've got a really tricky question, so I'm going to try and intermingle it in with the next one. So panelists, it's the same question, but I'm just going to add something to it. Someone anonymously has put, how can you be truly inclusive considering some students who have extreme behavioural challenges that may interrupt not only their education, but the others within the classroom? Now, the question we've got is, how can school leaders, head teachers and principals support teachers to effectively include all learners? So that's, could we try and intertwine those two together? It's very difficult to answer, but a really important question that we should probably try to discuss today. Can we start with Paul, please?
Sure, very good question. As a classroom teacher here in the UK, I worked with children who displayed incredibly violent behaviour on occasions. At times, I had to remove 29 children out of the classroom and remain with the one violent child to protect the safety of the 29 children. And that's in the middle of a lesson. Just if it becomes a danger, then you need to take action. As a school leader, one of my greatest achievements I would say, was a young girl who, her first day at my school, age 4, was also my first day at the school. We arrived together, and she had emerged a very difficult life. Her first 4 years of life were very, very challenging. And unsurprisingly, she exhibited very extreme violent behavior. She would bite people's faces. She would be very, very violent. And within the first 2 days, the class teacher came to me and said, I'm not teaching her. I can't have that. And I said, okay, that's fine. I will do it. And so I said to the teacher, every time there's a behavioral challenge, you send for me, I will come. So this is my first day, my second day, my first week, my first month, my first term. And that same approach continued for that child's entire time in our school. So I went through Ofsted inspections where I would be sat in a meeting with the lead Ofsted inspector, and somebody would come and say, you needed. And I would just say, excuse me, and get up and walk out, go to that young person and take over. So that the teacher always had the knowledge that whatever happened, the worst that could happen is we've just got to deal with it for 2 minutes until Paul arrives, and then he will take over. He will then manage it. And it was a very, very slow process. But I eventually built a trusting relationship with that young person. And I'd got a diver's watch at the time that clicked if I turned the bezel. And so it took me 3 years to get there, but I would be able to go into the classroom, sit down near to this young person, and then just click my watch like that, click, 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 and then just stop. And I would be watching the lesson. I wouldn't say anything. And we got to a point where the girl would go, oh, all right, then come on. And then we'd leave. And then we would talk about what had happened and talk about appropriate choices. And I would always say to her and to all the children I work with, I can't make you behave. I can't make you make the right choices. These are choices that you have to make. All I can do is make sure that you're supported, and there are sanctions if you don't do the right thing. So here's your sanction. So that consistency and that click, 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 by the way, was the amount me just saying, okay, I've set the timer. However long it takes you to calm down is the time you're going to pay back, out of your playtime, out of your dinner time, out of, whatever. And I say that young person is my greatest achievement as a head teacher. We quadrupled academic standards in 3 years. But I was just approaching the end of my time as a head teacher before leaving to work on what I'm working on now. But that young person came back to see me when she was in year 5, and she came to see me and she said, "Mr. Rose, I'm a prefect." And I said, "That's fantastic. Well done." And
Thank you, Paul.
yeah, there you go.
Thank you. Thank you. Dominic, please, just 60 seconds if you can, if possible.
Blimey, 60 seconds. Yes, I mean, there was a chap called Dennis Piper, who's an advisor for Salford and does a bit of work with our university, and where he was giving a little introduction to a unit, and he said it was all about behaviour, because it was still considered a separate special educational need in those days, but it's not, of course. And he made this really good comment: behaviour equals communication, and really it's our job to be finding out what's really going on. And Paul's spoken very eloquently about a child who's bringing a rucksack full of problems, to school, and there's only a certain amount we can do, but that much we should do. And I've just finished a project up in the north of northwest of England, looking at a town with the highest rate of school exclusions in the country. There are examples of good practice. We can talk about time out. We can talk about lots of different ways of actually taking a child away from a dangerous situation, putting them in a place of safety, discussing things, and gradual reintegration. It doesn't mean bunging them out and changing schools all the time, because that doesn't really address the actual problems. And I'm aware I've only got 60 seconds, but it's this thing about not giving up on kids and trying to get the small pluses. Solution orientated schools is a really good way to go. Small incremental changes with clear targets for kids that they've bought into. There you are, 60 seconds.
Thank you. Well done. Janet, please, same time.
Same time.
If possible.
Well, let's be absolutely honest about this. I'm not going to talk about behaviour, because we've got real experts in behaviour here. It takes time to effectively include all learners. It takes money, and it takes commitment from everybody. End of. That's what we've got to get right, and that's hard.
In a nutshell, absolutely. Emma, please.
Perfect mix of all the responses so far. I would just say, yes, behaviour does challenge, and behaviour is a communication. And I think as educators, we have to allow ourselves to feel the challenge and know that it's challenging us. Because I think sometimes when we're in the classroom as a teacher, we kind of get into, I should be able to solve this mentality. And that's not necessarily the case. So we have to give everybody the opportunity to say that this is bigger than me and this is challenging me. And that's how leadership can help. We support all of our teams to be able to have that voice, as well as the child having the voice with their communication and their behaviours. And then it is about how committed are you as a space? How committed are you to ensure that all young people are going to have the time, like the ticking clock from Paul, which I loved, to basically work through the trauma, looking at trauma-informed schools, looking at things like Thrive, having those things in place to support not just the children, but the staff. I think that's really, really important. And I know I've only got a little bit of time, so I'm just going to quickly give a quick analogy. If ever we have a migraine and all of our friends say, we want to take you to a club tonight, and if I don't take you to that club, I'm not including you. Actually, that is an inclusion at its best at that moment. I could take the medication, I could go into a darker room in that club, but still that's going to impact my migraine. We have to get to the point where we understand what's causing the headache for the child. And we don't just keep putting them back into the environment that continues that headache going forward. So it's ensuring that we have a real clear identification process in place, a real clear knowledge of what might be happening for that young person, be it from a SEND point of view, and a trauma point of view, and getting to a point where we can give the right medication at the right time and also in the right environment. And some days that means we have to say to that young person, or that young person has to say to us, this classroom isn't perfect for me today.
Thank you, Emma. The next question is especially for student teachers, early career teachers, and we're going to intertwine it with a question from Fulia. The question is, how can teachers differentiate for all learners effectively? And Fulia's question is, teachers don't know how to adapt materials and how to include students with Down syndrome to topic during lessons. And they're saying they're getting bored as they have to sit during 40 minutes and listen to a lesson they can't really understand. Now I'll start this just for a minute. It's important to, when you look at your class, to not think, well, the class are going to do this job and the little girl with Down syndrome is going to do this. The class are going to be doing maths, but the little girl with Down syndrome can't do that maths lesson, so she has to do something different. I understand that you are asking about differentiation, and of course, essential, but let's try and look at the whole lesson. Let's try and think, well, we're going to be learning about fractions today, so what does everyone need to learn? You're already massively differentiating your lesson, aren't you? You've got some learners that find it really easy and some learners that find it incredibly difficult. So let's just differentiate it one more step to ensure that there's something that all your learners in your class can contribute to, can answer, can tackle, even just in part, independently throughout that lesson. So if your class are learning about maths, then that will include your learner with Down syndrome or any other special educational need or disability or barrier. Understand academically what your children can do. It does take time. I go into schools, secondary school teachers say, I just don't know how to include them. How can I possibly include that little boy over there with Down syndrome? He can't keep up with my lesson. I'm standing here talking for 45 minutes and she can't contribute. Well, I'm sure a 45-minute speech is not that enjoyable for most children. Just think how you can make your lesson more interactive, more inclusive for everybody, that everybody can buy into and engage with. And I think that's a good starting point for teachers when including a learner that you might think, well, they can't possibly join in with this. Let's go to next answer. It would be Dom, please.
Okay, thanks. I mean, everything you've just said, Chris, I would totally endorse. Recently, I've been quite involved in looking at the potential for universal design for learning, UDL as it's called, which was developed in the United States in the 1980s, 1990s. I noticed someone on the chat has already alluded to UDL, and I think it's really, really powerful. And it picks up a little bit on Chris's point about the fact that our differentiation should be built in, not bolted on. It also makes assumptions when we think, well, that kid's got dyslexia. I know exactly what a dyslexic person is. Actually, well, there's some rough guidelines, but there's as much variation within your dyslexic, your autistic, labeled population as there is, you know, within and without it. I used to offer my students my next month's salary in cash if they could tell me where the barrier, that, you know, the frontier of dyslexia land lies. You can't. There's certain words I can't spell if you put a gun against my head, right? So that said, the fact of the matter is that really nobody is neurotypical. No, you know, we are all neurodiverse, and if our UDL bases itself on that principle, and a must, could, should model, which has been alluded to already, is good. I think it's really important that children come away with at least something achieved, and ideally independently. UDL has got 3 basic principles, and it's multiple means of engagement. You know, how am I going to make this lesson matter to a kid? Why the hell should I learn about the gunpowder plot? You know, what's in it for me? And if we talk about discrimination and bias and stuff like that, and you know, racism and religious intoleration, we've got a little link between our current world and the world of the gunpowder plot. So multiple means of engagement. How does this relate to children's lives? How does this relate? What do children bring to this lesson? Second point, multiple means of presentation. When I'm going to get them involved, certain kids, no, they will switch off if you're just yakking at them, but certain kids will pay a bit of attention to maybe a short film clip. Certain kids can navigate a poster, and if that's on the wall, it's something they can refer back to. So multiple means of presentation of a new topic. And then finally, and I think possibly most importantly, multiple means of expression. And this is UDL's 3rd principle. And, you know, when I've got to show my knowledge, skills and understanding, does it always have to be a piece of extended writing? No, it doesn't. It can be, I've got together with some mates and we've made a little playlet. I've developed a short news broadcast. I've developed a poster. I've developed a mind map, etc. Or I've developed a cartoon strip, etc., etc., etc. I remember doing an inset actually at my wife's secondary school where she was a head of languages. And afterwards, a woman came up to me and said, are we allowed to do that? And I said, well, who's told you you can't? This was an RE teacher. And at the end of her lessons, everyone had to produce writing. And she couldn't work out why the kids were sort of so switched off. So children have different ways of showing their knowledge, skills and understanding. And I think UDL, I would recommend it. Lovely book by Katie Novak. I am no relation, I'm not her agent. UDL, A Teacher's Guide to Applying UDL in the Classroom, is a really practical introduction to how to get started. And like most of these things, it's incremental, gradually build your practice.
Thank you. Great. Fantastic. Janet, please.
Thanks. I think 3 things here. So first of all, if you asked me to sit still for 40 minutes and listen to something, I couldn't. It would have to be something that was amazingly compelling. I think that's true of most adults. So the fact that very often we're expecting young people to do that, then I think any young person would struggle. Any old person like me would struggle. So let's not do that. The second thing, I want to take Dominic's UDL principles and just apply them to myself and explain perhaps a little bit. So one of the things that I can't understand, and my family laugh at me all the time about, is I can't understand the international dateline. It's absolutely beyond me how it can be tomorrow somewhere and today somewhere else. It's completely, I just don't get it. So if somebody's explaining, as my teenage daughter keeps on trying to explain the international dateline to me, so what she does is she tries to do it in different ways. So she tries to say, look, mummy, if we go on holiday, then this is what's happening, or that's what's happening, tries to make it relevant to me. She tries to provide different ways. So bless her, and my husband are quite often seen in the garden where they're trying to explain it to me, holding up a football and an orange and a plane and those sorts of things, a different way of representing what it is. And how I will never be able to write an essay on the international dateline, ever in a million years. But one day I might be able to say, oh, I need to phone my friend in Australia at this time or that time because I've finally twigged it. So how I'm understanding it is different, and they will know that. So I think that those principles of UDL can be used in everything. That's why it's UDL, it's universal things. And the other thing that I would say in relation to this is, please, can we not compare children? So again, my daughters say to me all the time, I always compare them and say, oh, well, your sister wasn't like that, and this, that, and the other, and it drives them bonkers. Let's not do it in the classroom either. We are all good, we're all different, we all have great things to bring. So even if we are sitting in the dark, as I now am, so let's not compare our kids, let's not compare children, because that doesn't help us at all.
Thank you, Janet. Absolutely. Emma, please.
I think with this answer around differentiation, I think this is where pedagogy and understanding the neuroscience of special educational needs comes together. And I think this is kind of the building block that I think education really needs to get their heads around. So it's about how does the autistic mind, some autistic minds gather information, or how do they, store it differently to a neurotypical mind in order to deliver a lesson that makes sense. And it could be the exact same lesson with a slight tweak. And I think that pedagogy of understanding, say, the teaching of reading, plus how the mind might work for somebody else who has a different mind, and how the mind then absorbs information, I think is the key thing that we need to start teaching in our schools. We also have to be aware of, sitting down. It's such a fantastic example, because most children's bodies are not ready for the education system that we have. And so we are asking children to do something that's not natural to them yet. We've got different systems around the world that don't do the formal sitting down and writing because of that. And so it's understanding that body systems, everybody's body system develops very differently at different stages. And so they'll approach things like skills of writing at a different stage. They'll approach things as skills of reading at a different stage, because their bodies are at a different stage and their development is at a different stage. So my answer to this one, which is not helpful right now for somebody who's an ECT, because this is definitely a leader's question, it is about, are you clear in your school about the pedagogy of teaching and learning anyway? Do people really understand the mechanisms of reading and how we read and how we actually become a reader? Not a decoder, an actual reader. And then do we know how the mind works for somebody, generally speaking, who has dyslexia, who has autism, who's Down syndrome, and that basically their muscle tongue responds differently, so actually their messages to their brain is different. Do we know this type of information to come together to make us the most effective teacher in the classroom for all of these groups that we're discussing? And that would be my lobby to the government, to start getting this information in, because actually that's where I think will make a massive difference alongside things like UDL.
Thank you very much. Paul, please.
Hi, yeah, so it's a good question. For me, I'd start with what's the purpose of education? Because it's very easy as an educator to listen to your teacher training and then look at the national curriculum and then look at the Ofsted priorities and say the only purpose of education is to gain qualifications. And the Education Secretary said a while ago, you know, the purpose of education is to get a good job. I don't personally believe in that. I believe that the purpose of education should be about giving children the future lives that they deserve and that they're able to go on and achieve, which goes back to, you know, the supporting social, emotional, physical and academic progress, seeing the whole child. And when you see the whole child and you look at every child that you're teaching, it then becomes much easier as a teacher to say, all right, yeah, we've got to teach maths. However, we don't have to do it in a sit down in rows. I will be the sage on the stage and you will all sit and take notes and listen. It doesn't have to be that, because if we're looking at social development within a maths lesson or within a series of maths lessons, we can plan opportunities for children to work in specific ways that encourage social interaction. So we can either say, sit in silence, get on with your work, which develops no social skills whatsoever, or we can look at it and say, okay, we're doing some maths work. What I want you to do is to work in pairs, and I want you to set each other challenges. See if you can find out what your partner knows or what your partner's able to do. And then if they get stuck, teach them. It doesn't have to be a whole lesson. It can be 5 or 10 minutes within a lesson that is tied into the learning objective that we as teachers are obsessed with. What are we trying to learn in this lesson? Generally speaking, it won't be to develop social interactions for children who struggle with social interactions. It will be, here's the maths, and this is what we've got to do. So in terms of planning, think about differentiation by activity. Can we give different children different activities? Some children really respond to working in silence. Therefore, allow those young people on occasions to do that, whilst other children work best when they're able to discuss and unpick. And can we have a lesson where we're thinking about activities like that? Or are we differentiated by outcome, where we're saying actually our academically high-flying children in this area, in this lesson, actually we expect them to achieve academically more than other children down here, and therefore, as long as every child makes progress from their starting points within a lesson and across lessons, then learning has to have been successful.
Thank you very much, Paul, indeed. Question 6, and we will get onto some of your points and questions in a few minutes' time. This follows on nicely. How can teaching staff practically ensure that learners with disabilities are included in school life? Practical tips, please, for Monday morning. How do we do that, please? Let's start with Dominic.
Okay. I'm going to just take it back to this business about recognising what children have. There's a general point about spotting where children are becoming marginalised. And actually, strangely enough, it's sometimes the kids that haven't attracted labels that are most vulnerable to marginalisation. But so I think that being aware of that is part of it. I think validation is a small, very practical point. I remember the first time I ever had a painting displayed at primary school. I'm no Leonardo, you know, I'm no Van Gogh, but I can still remember it was a picture of a boat, and I can remember where it was in that classroom and how proud I felt. I would have been about 6. And it meant the world to me because I wasn't a great artist, but she picked out on that and said, you've done really well there. And I think one thing we can do is think, if kids have actually sat down and produced some work, how do we celebrate that? And it used to be just part and parcel of a primary school teacher, sort of, you know, all those early evenings when the caretaker's trying to chuck you out and you're still stapling paintings to the wall. And I think we may have lost sight of that. But I think it's those kids that often don't. You know, it's not just the Leonardos in the classroom. I want the paintings on the wall. I want everybody's contribution. And a great thing to do is just give kids like a small Instamatic camera, let them go around, or just use their mobile phones, let them go around and say, what in this school is important to me? And that would be a really good starting point for an inclusive project. And then we get those photos up, and then kids can maybe tell us why those things are important. That would be a small practical point.
Thank you very much. Janet?
Let's say good morning. So actually, let's say good morning to everybody. Let's say good morning to all the young people with whom we're working, to the cleaner who's maybe just on her way home, to everybody, because I think that can make a massive difference. I can remember when I had my elder daughter in a wheelchair going into school one day, and the caretaker said, you can't come in early, you're not allowed in. It had been agreed that we were allowed in with the head teacher, but the head teacher hadn't told the estate staff that we were allowed to go in early. So we stood outside in the pouring rain, with her getting wetter and wetter and colder, because not everybody had been involved. And really, it was really simple. I made a bit of a fuss, a bit tired of making a fuss, but anyway, made a bit of a fuss. So have we said good morning to everybody? Does everybody know what's going on? Does everybody know about the values that our school is trying to embody? Does everybody know? And I mean the caretaker and the cleaner and the guy who's cutting the grass and the person who does the photocopying and the receptionists and all those people. So a really simple step is actually, as a new teacher, make sure that you're talking to everybody in the school. You're saying hello to the parents, you're saying hello to the carers dropping kids off, you're saying hello to absolutely everybody. Hiya, I'm Janet, I'm a teacher here. Who are you? Tell me about you. That, I think, that belongingness, that community, that maybe is too simple, but I really think something like that makes a massive difference.
Thank you. Emma, please.
Love that. And I just want to build up on that, really. Communication, key, massive. You know, that sense of belonging, that talking and touching base with everybody, but that internal communication between staff as well, and communication that is really positive and helpful. So when you're passing that child on, that child that may have been a little bit sticky or a little bit sparky, be careful about how you're passing on that information to that new teacher. Be careful how you're sharing that experience, so that new teacher has the facts, but also has a very clear, I'm going to start from the start with this child. So be really careful about the internal communication and how that then also impacts those values, and how that shares and shares the picture of the young people that you're working with. The other thing around communication as well is how you use communication to create predictability. So many children with different needs and different ways of seeing the world just need that little bit of predictability in spaces like schools. And so we need to use our communication to enhance the environments enough to create that sense of predictability. So it's that belonging, that connection, but also that predictability that's going to support that culture to keep getting deeper and deeper into your organisations. So very much so communication.
Thank you. Paul, please.
Practical ways to support inclusion. When I was a classroom teacher a long time ago now, we had a young boy who was a wheelchair user, and I was PE leader in the school, and I was tasked with organising a sports day. First time I'd ever done it. And so I looked at us as a whole school community and said, okay, this needs to be inclusive. It needs to have every child in it, every child participating, etc. How do we make that happen? So I started planning the sports day from this young boy who was in a wheelchair. And I sat down with him and I said, right, sports day is coming up. what should we do? How do you want it to be? And so we had a conversation. I spoke to his parents. I then went on and spoke to the support services that are out there, occupational health, physiotherapy, etc., and built this picture of what this young person was able to do, what challenges they faced. And then from there said, okay, so now I understand this one child. Now, how do I build the rest of the school's activity to mirror what this one young person needs? And so I got rid of the running races and all of that notion for that period of time, because it was the right thing to do. And we had an experience which was where this young person was able to roll a ball down a ramp. We looked at that and said, okay, we've got those resources. They've come from occupational health. Now, how do we design a similar challenge for all able-bodied children so that they're all doing almost the same? And then how do we invite parents in, etc., etc.? That's just what I did. It wasn't from any deep knowledge. It was just seemed to be the right thing to do. Somehow, and I suspect my head teacher at the time had something to do with it, somehow the Department for Education got wind of it and turned up with TV cameras, or certainly posh cameras, and recorded it all. And then interviewed me afterwards and said, how did all this come to happen? And I just said, well, it's just, just what we do here. And it went on to feature in a resource that's still available in every single school in the UK around reasonable adjustments. So there is a file, and too often it gathers dust in the planning and preparation room in schools, that all 28,000 schools in the UK received. It's got practical guidance in terms of how you make reasonable adjustments to include every child in the work of the school. And it's not just related to PE, it's related to everything. So if you're in a UK school and you've got access to that, go and find it, dust it off, and have a good read of it. You'll see me with hair, and there's loads of practical advice that will really transform your practice.
Thank you very much. Let's think about practically including a learner in your class then. The biggest thing I've got written down is communication. I know a lot of you have said that on the chat. I've noticed that. One of the best resources you will get is that child's parents. Build a really good relationship immediately. Talk to them and get to know them. Talk to them every single day, if this is practical and possible. Understand, listen to them, what they're telling you about their child. They know them better and will know them better than you ever will. So build up a relationship, a working relationship with parents, if possible. If it has to be via the Senko, absolutely fine. Set up a routine. Set up something that works for them. When they walk in that door, high five, whatever it is, saying hello, putting their stuff away. How is that going to work? Where's their kit? Where does it live? Where do they sit? Where are their resources? How do they communicate best? Do they use computer? Do they use written work? Where do they sit? Who are their friends? What do they like doing? Do they need a visual timetable? That will benefit everybody. What will work for everybody, but will work for them. Understand the way that they learn best. Are they doing work with paraprofessionals? Are they working with speech and language? Listen to them. Are they working with occupational therapists? Listen to them. Invite them in to talk to your class. Invite them in to talk to your staff. How can you include this child with the fun stuff? Are there performances? Are there sports days? Are there trips and activities and treats and assemblies? Get them involved where they can to be part of it. Absolutely, just being part of the things that you're all doing, the break times, the lunch times, the things that happen every day. Consider them. Take time. It will take time. Think, how will it work in this point? How will it work at the end of maths? How will it work when it's hot? How will it work when we're all moving around the class? Really just write them all down and consider how it worked best for that child. Think about your whole class. There'll be more than one that you'll have to really deeply consider, and then put together a plan of how you're going to set up your room, set up your day, set up your timetable so it works best for everybody. Now, we've got some questions. We've got a lot of questions that have come in, so I'm going to skip the last one, if you don't mind, panelists. And I'm going to go on to a question from Sue. And this is, how do we address the argument, which is there's no resources, there's no money, we can't meet your need. How do we begin possibly to address that argument? I can see you nodding. Janet, do you mind if I go to you?
No. And I said, didn't I, money is absolutely key, and it is. But as an individual practitioner, there's lots of things that we can do that actually don't have to cost a lot of money. Just what Chris was talking about then, about thinking about needs and saying, have I thought about this? How might that work? How might this work? Just simple things, maybe like, can I just have a look at where people are sitting? Can I have a look at who's sitting next to who? Let me think about those sorts of things. So at a basic level, there is stuff that as a classroom teacher you can do. But at the same time, I think it's really important that we lobby and we make sure that senior leadership know that this is significant, that we do need time to do these things. We need resources, we need those things too. So it's really important to keep on being the one, if you're a teacher in a staff meeting, who's the one who's going, can I just say, every single time, it's go all the time at it, while still trying very hard not to get discouraged about your own practice. And that's very, very difficult, because you do sometimes feel, I think, as an educator in the classroom, that you're banging your head against a brick wall. But if you make a difference to one person, and you will, if you make a difference to one person, that one person never forgets you. You never forget that teacher who made a difference to you. So it's do the little things, but don't forget to bang on about the big things. Join in with things like this. Be part of this. Be part of a Twitter community. Make sure that we're putting pressure on at the same time as doing little things too.
Wonderful, thank you. Can I go to you, Emma, on that? Resources, money, can't meet the need. How do we begin to respond to that?
Completely agree. Janet's just said it all. I think, money is going to be very important. We want to ensure that we're giving the absolute best to all children, and that takes finance. But I would also say, and I also say this to any leader that I work with, that there is a professional and ethical reason to do the best that you can with what you've got. And so we've got to ensure that, educators are saying these children are in our doors. And so it's our job to think about how we're going to educate them. That's what we're trained for. We're trained to remove barriers to learning. We're trained for that. That's what teaching is about. So for me, there's a professional and ethical reason to keep pushing forward, while keep knocking from government downwards for the right resources so that this can be done at its best level. But right now in the classroom, we just have, we are responsible for this. That's what our job is. So that's where I kind of pushed the hard bit there. But I also wanted to join on to what you said earlier as well, Chris, around parents. I think do not forget that resource. It's a massive one. And also your impact on that child will impact that family. As a SEND parent, I know that I always have that little gnawing thing at the back of my mind. Oh, is he going to be included in that? And then he's included, and it just makes such a difference to me as his mom. It makes such a difference to us as a family about how his life feels and his experience in his schooling at this time. So do not underestimate, one, pushing forward without resources, that you're making more impacts than you think. You're not just impacting that child, you're impacting that family, you're impacting that family's mental health, you're impacting the family's ability to go to work, you're impacting the family's concept of what their child's going to experience in the future. So it's not just about what's happening in my classroom. When that child leaves you, they're going home with a story. It's how we shape that story as well. It makes a massive difference. It really does.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. Completely agree. Dom, can you come in on that?
Yeah, I mean, there's no question that I doubt there's a country on the planet that would say our education system's fully funded, and we can and should be always doing better, because that's an investment in our future as a nation. But I mean, the politics aside, as a Senko, I got quite good at sniffing out funding streams. And I'll give you a couple of little examples. One was, I think it was back in the early zeros, that there seemed to be quite a lot of money coming from the government for ICT. And it was so vague. It was so vague. There's an ICT money coming into schools. And I said, right, ICT is brilliant for kids with a variety of sort of learning difficulties. Here's a range of software that everyone can enjoy. And there's things like Clicker, WordShark. You may know some of these programs. And so I diverted that general ICT funding towards stuff that was going to be very much SEND friendly. One example. There are online loads of free resources. If you go to the TES website, there are loads and loads of free resources that they're shared, downloadable. Again, the Clicker website, which does Clicker grids, which are like electronic word banks that you can start. Teachers put them into a sort of shared pool. So it's always looking out for that. It's also looking out for where government is actually put free resources online as well. There was a whole suite of software about 10 years ago whose name escapes me. It's for children with dyslexic/visual impairment difficulties. And they had all sorts of amazing stuff like read back software for text, et cetera, et cetera. Again, it was just knowing about it. So it's really having people in the school that are sniffing around looking for these funding streams. And the last thing I'd also mention is links with local businesses don't do any harm. I'm not advocating we just give up on central funding and we just go cap in hand to businesses, but there's a lot of goodwill out there. There's a lot of goodwill out there, and it can be really profitable also in terms of with older children and young people, is helping them forge links with the world of work, because we can be very inclusive in schools. And sometimes businesses don't know quite a lot about it, and forging those links can actually bring resources as well as kind of understanding and pathways into employment.
Thank you so much. We're going to just try and squeeze in another one. Sorry, I missed you off there, Paul. Ben's put, and some other people have mentioned monitoring, grades, results, data, what we're being, what we're being reported on. Someone's put Ofsted, exclamation mark. This must be mentioned this morning, because as class teachers and as school leaders and as executives for academies, we're being reported on black and white numbers. And this, as we can probably all agree, isn't the best priority. But as educators that are being monitored on that, how can we balance successful and moral and effective inclusion with a successful career in black and white? Because that's difficult to do in my experience. Can I go to Paul? Sorry to throw that on you without any time.
No problem at all. I think this is the classic challenge in education, isn't it? That thing about if I include young people, it's going to have a detrimental effect. In the UK, we're seeing a lot the SEND crisis, with children being off-rolled and excluded from schools and denied school places and so on. For me, I remember one staff meeting that we had when I was a head teacher, where I caused quite a lot of upset, because I said, thing is, people, it's good when adults leave a school, and it was misinterpreted. And what I meant by that was, we as the adults can elect not to be in school. So I can hold my hand up and go, actually, I'm not having this anymore. I resign. And whether it's because I'm not paid enough, or whether it's because I don't believe in the system anymore, or because I actually don't believe in the values of this organization that I'm working in, I can hand in my notice and be gone in 4 to 6 weeks. Children can't. And therefore, as a professional, we have a duty to turn up and do the job that we believe that we're employed to do. And if you look at Twitter, EduTwitter, the two sides of education are absolutely there. You've got the trad. It's all about qualifications to improve the life chances of the kids who are socially, deprived, et cetera, et cetera. I was one of those kids. Therefore, I'm a champion of qualifications and, getting a good job. And then you get the other side that says, actually, but the purpose of education is to meet the needs of all children. And behavior is, quite rightly, and I do believe this, behavior is a form of communication. And therefore, our job is to do that. At the end of the day, we as professionals have to look ourselves in the mirror every single day and say, this is why I do the job that I do. And if you are somebody that is finding themselves employed in a school where actually inclusion doesn't matter, vote with your feet, walk, go and find a school that does, or stay and challenge the status quo. But the reality is, if our mortgages depend on it, we've got some serious decisions that we have to make. And for me as a professional, I was never afraid to tell Ofsted what I thought of them, what I thought of the framework, etc., etc. So, you know, do what you know is right, not what's easy, would be my advice.
Thank you so much. And could you go for 60 seconds on that, please, Emma?
Definitely. I just wanted to add to that, and I think that's spot on, Paul. But what I would say is the schools that I've gone into, where the head teachers and the leadership have just been brave enough to say, we're going to have these children in, we're going to do this, are actually some of the most outstanding schools you'll find. They'll probably be graded at good because of the progress data, but actually when you're in there, they're outstanding because they've looked at the needs of each learner. So the progress of the whole school actually benefits from the fact that they've got to think about this group differently, and you find that their curriculum is just stronger as a result of understanding inclusion and children's needs. So the fear of it is actually probably holding the system back, because those schools that have really pushed forward are probably some of the best schools that I've been in. So I think from a leader point of view, I say go for it, because it will probably make a massive difference to what you're doing.
Thank you. Just less than a minute, Janet, if you can close out some thoughts on that, please.
I can. So we talked about inclusion being important and relevant to everybody. This just builds on what Emma said. If you get inclusion right, everything else will fall into place. And I know that sounds very naive. Actually, it's true. So you get those things right. So your inclusive practice is right for everybody. And that way, all those things that we're measuring, and we measure an awful lot of things, and if it moves, measure it. If it doesn't move, let's measure it in case it moves later. Those sorts of things, we do all that, but the measuring will follow behind. I know that, I've done it, I've seen it happen, so has Emma. Get the inclusion right first.
Thank you so much, and really appreciate all your comments, and massive respect and thanks to all of our panelists today. 2 weeks ago, I visited a school, Central London, Tower Hamlets, massive area for deprivation, Mayflower Primary, big shout out to them. It was like walking into chaos. I said, this is like organised chaos in this class. As a first impression, as I walked in, it was noisy and vibrant and loud and dynamic, and children are moving around, and I had no idea which children were the special needs children at all. I weren't sure in some of the classrooms who was the teacher, because there's two adults normally, and they were both working, really working and teaching. It was amazing. It was such a dynamic and inspirational place to be. And after spending just a short time, you realised the teachers knew those kids. The senior staff knew every single child's name in that building, and they are the top scoring school in the UK 2020 for data. So it can work. It does go hand in hand. That is proof. It's been a real pleasure talking to you today, everybody, and we really thank you for your attendance. As you can see, the more we talk, the more questions come out. I wish we had more time and we could go into some more of your questions. We could easily fill another couple of hours, I know. Please complete, if Anna, we could have the final screen up, please. Please complete the survey that will pop up at the end of this webinar. We've got more in the pipeline, and there's more that we plan to do, especially with parents and with student teachers. So there's lots more coming. Please stay in touch, follow our campaign at the Down Syndrome International website. Once again, many, many thanks to Emma, Paul, Natalie, Dominic and Janet for your time this morning. It's been a really, really good time. And thank you all attendees for joining. Thank you very much. Thank you, Emma. Thank you, Dom. Thank you, Janet and Paul. Love what you said. Brilliant stuff. Really appreciate it.
Good.
Bye, Chris. Bye, everybody.
Bye,
Yeah,
everyone.
bye, everyone.
See you, Janet. See you later. See you
Enjoyed
soon.
that. Was good.
Cheers,
Pleasure.
Dom. Cheers, Paul.
everyone.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Cheers, Dom. Thanks for your time, mate. Thank you, attendees. Please stick a little thanks or a little hi on the chat, and any questions, we'll do our best to get through and answer. Thanks everyone very much, everybody.